Hey guys, it's Sasha. The global car industry is going into meltdown. Today, Volkswagen staff are striking across factories in Germany after Volkswagen announced the need to cut costs. This is the biggest strike in Germany in 6 years and comes on the back of Volkswagen struggling financially, with the stock trading lower today than it was back in 2007, 17 years ago. Also, this morning, the Stellantis CEO has resigned after the world's fourth largest car maker has seen a big drop in profits in 2024, with sales collapsing all over the world. While Volkswagen is trading at a PE ratio of 3.3, Stellantis is now trading at 2.6 after its stock fell 8% as the markets opened. The low valuations of Volkswagen and Stellantis by the stock market suggest that there is now an expectation of a funeral for both companies in the not too distant future. Last week, the Japanese car manufacturer Nissan was in the news, with a senior official from the company reportedly saying that Nissan only has 12 to 14 months left to survive. Renault have cut their losses and sold their shares of Nissan, and there are now active rumors that maybe Nissan will be acquired by Honda just before going bankrupt. The Nissan chief executive is taking a 50% pay cut, and the chief financial officer has just resigned as Nissan is aggressively cutting costs to try and save themselves. Mercedes-Benz is also in trouble after issuing multiple profit warnings this year, and Mercedes stock is now trading lower than it was back in 1998, which is incidentally also the last time they made a good car. According to Ola Källenius, the CEO of Mercedes, the reason Mercedes is doing so badly is because of low demand in China, which incidentally is the same excuse that Porsche has given, as Porsche sales in China have collapsed this year. BMW is also in deep trouble, with sales plummeting, especially in China, where sales have fallen 30% in the most recent report, and a recent recall to fix the brakes on 1.5 million cars has certainly not helped BMW either. Ford have announced layoffs, including 3,800 jobs being cut in Europe, 1,300 of those in the UK. This is reportedly because of issues with demand for EVs and competition from China. But Ford has struggled in Europe for some time now and has been making losses and cutting jobs for several years. Incidentally, Ford's share price is also lower than it was back in 1998. There are three big reasons why car manufacturers around the world are struggling: the state of the economy, especially for those on lower wages, electric vehicles, and China. And by the way, I am running a deep dive on this exact topic on Thursday in my course. I do weekly live sessions as well as all of the other course content, which is all about the analytics of investing. My sale finishes at midnight EST tonight. That's 5 a.m. on Tuesday morning UK time, but if you're watching on the Monday today, as I'm releasing this video today, the sale is still on. So if you want to get your 10% off my course, use the code BLACKFRIDAY24 at the checkout. Go to sashayanchin.com to get the Investor Playbook course. Now, when you read the financial reports of the struggling car manufacturers and listen to the Q&A on their earnings call, the biggest reason for the decline that at the moment is being touted across every single major company is China. Because while all the big Western car companies are struggling, Chinese car manufacturers are absolutely booming. BYD just announced that they delivered 504,000 cars in November to set a new record. This is a huge number. They are fast catching up to the biggest car manufacturers in the world. Xiaomi only launched their first electric car in March and has already managed to sell over 100,000 of them so far this year. In November, Xiaomi sold over 20,000 cars in 1 month for the second month in a row. XPeng also had a record month in November, delivering almost 31,000 cars, up 29% on the previous month. And the fascinating thing is that these companies are all mainly selling electric cars, or at least hybrids, while at the same time, all the big Western manufacturers are blaming electric cars for their demise. In fact, the pressure from car manufacturers has led to multiple different governments to start slowly walking back on all of the different electric vehicle targets that they set. Go all electric by 2030 or by 2035 or whatever, because none of the incumbents, these all traditional car manufacturers, seem to be able to work out how to make electric vehicles at a reasonable price while also actually turning a profit. A BMW 5 Series with the petrol engine starts from £51,000, but the equivalent equivalent electric car is 33% more expensive at £67,700. The Mercedes GLA starts from £34,000, but the roughly equivalent EQA starts from £42,000, almost 25% more expensive. And most big car manufacturers haven't worked out how to make cheap, good electric cars. The most sold car in the UK in October was the Kia Sportage. Prices start under £30,000. The second most popular is the Ford Puma, and that one starts at £26,000. A comparable EV with a reasonable range costs 20 to 30% more. And yes, there is the long-term benefit with EVs that charging electric cars is cheaper than buying petrol. You save a lot of money over time, and maintenance costs are significantly lower. Yes, that is another benefit. But at a time when many people are struggling financially after a once-in-a-generation inflation spike, the sticker price on the car, the amount of money you have to put up front, is a big deal. Charging infrastructure is another major problem. If you have a Tesla and there are superchargers around where you live and on the routes that you take, you're probably all right. But anyone who has driven an EV, especially not a Tesla, and tried to charge at a random charging station in the middle of nowhere knows the process is incredibly bad at the moment. You need about 25 different apps on your phone, one for every single charging company. They're all different, they all work differently. Installing and setting up one of these apps, if you have Signal, takes about 3 hours from my personal extremely satisfied experience. The payment doesn't work half of the time. The app can't connect to the charger where you parked about 80% of the time, and at least 40% of the time the charger seems to be broken or out of service. So roughly 170% of the time you experience some kind of issue. And when you compare that to just driving up to a petrol station, filling up and paying in 2 minutes, that is definitely something that will put lots of people off switching to EVs. Infrastructure is improving, but it's not improving fast enough. Certainly not fast enough to make people switch. The EU and the UK are on the one hand mandating that people should switch to EVs. You know, EVs are green, that's really good, everyone should do it. But on the other hand, the car companies that we have in the UK and the EU, and the ones that manufacture in the UK and the EU, can't make good EVs at a profit, and the infrastructure is far too disjointed. The issue is that EVs are 100% the future. The world will change to EVs because they are superior to blowing up explosive liquid a few centimeters in front of your face in pretty much every single way if you're objective. But it needs companies to reimagine their businesses from the ground up. It needs them to completely transform what they do and how they do it. And at the moment, most big car manufacturers are sticking wheels on a horse and calling it a car. In China, the EV revolution is in full swing. There are over 120 different brands of electric vehicles on sale in China, more than twice as many as in the United States. And the rest of the world is panicking because these Chinese companies seem to have figured out how to make EVs in high volume and at a competitive price. A month ago, Europe introduced a 35% tariff on cars made in China, and this new tariff comes on top of an already existing 10% tariff on those cars. Earlier this year, Joe Biden introduced a 100% tariff on Chinese car imports. This tariff was previously set at 25%, and it means it's almost impossible for Chinese car makers to produce cars in China and then sell them in the United States or Europe at a competitive price, even with the much cheaper labor costs and operating costs. The problem with this trade war is that banning the Chinese companies from selling decent, improving electric cars in Europe and the United States hasn't magically made the European and American car companies figure out how to make EVs themselves. Most of the major car manufacturers have been cancelling and postponing plans to switch from petrol and electric cars, especially in recent years after first trying it and then failing at it. The anomaly in the data seems to be General Motors. While every other major car company is self-destructing, profits and revenues completely collapsing, GM's revenues and profits have kept growing. In 2020, General Motors announced plans to spend $27 billion to convert the company to making EVs. By 2025, GM was going to release 30 new electric car models, transition massively into EVs, and have more than 20 models on sale in North America. And 2025 is now less than a month away, and GM's EV production is nowhere near those plans. But that may well be why they bucked the trend. Ford went in hard on EVs with the Lightning and the Mach-E, but production of the Lightning is currently suspended, and the Mach-E sold 13,000 cars in the most recent quarter, which is a rounding error on Ford's total vehicle volume. Ford and GM both also have the issue that a lot of their cars are manufactured over in Mexico, including the Mach-E, and if Trump's tariffs come in at 25% as being said, that's not going to help the sale of those Mach-E's either. It seems that consumers are very confused by the car manufacturers seemingly have no idea what it is that they are doing. One week they're going all EV, next week they're like, no, cancel that, we're going to continue pumping petrol cars. The average car age for passenger cars in the US has increased sharply to 13.6 years in 2023, 2 years more than back in 2016. This is the sort of data where if you live in a relatively well-off community, in a relatively well-off state somewhere, you probably don't imagine that people drive cars that are much older than 3 or 5 years or whatever, but this is the average. It appears that people are postponing buying a new car and holding onto their existing cars much longer. Part of that is probably the underlying economy. People just can't afford it. They don't have the money to go and upgrade their cars like they would have 5 or 10 years ago. But another side to the story may well be people waiting to buy an electric car and not wanting to commit to buying a brand new petrol car that is likely to become obsolete. But without good value electric cars on the market, people are sitting there waiting for those new models to actually arrive. But the trade war and the huge tariffs mean that if you live in Europe or in the United States, you can't go and buy Chinese electric cars, even if they are good and better than the European or American equivalents. And the issue there is that the adoption of electric cars is running much slower than it would otherwise in Europe and the United States. As EV penetration is generally low, there is little incentive for the government, for commercial enterprises to improve the charging infrastructure. If you live in a major city and you don't have off-street parking, well, an electric car may well be a massive headache, as charging is hard to find, very slow often, and relatively expensive. The reason countries like China and Norway have pushed so hard on EV adoption, Norway is going 100% in a few days, is because EVs really begin making a lot of sense for the country as a whole if the whole country takes the plunge and chooses to switch quickly. The cost of running and maintaining electric cars is much lower. So once EVs become dominant, the economy begins benefiting from people having more money to spend on other sectors of the economy instead of sending money for petrol to the Middle East or Russia. And the charging infrastructure begins benefiting from economies of scale, where chargers become abundant and easy to access, and it makes a lot more sense to go and build them. And if the transition happens slowly, as what we're seeing in the United States and most of Europe, you get into a chicken and egg problem, where spending billions on infrastructure that very few people are using doesn't make any sense. And while this is happening, the big car manufacturers are going to suffer. We're starting to see it already, but as the traditional car companies continue not being able to switch to EVs, the death of many of these big brands will only accelerate. Remember, if you want to discuss this in a lot more detail, sign up to my course, The Investor Playbook. Use the code BLACKFRIDAY24 to get your 10% discount by the end of today. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you later.